My mother-in-law gossiped about my baby. What I did at Christmas dinner shocked her. Hi, my name is Sophia. I am 33 years old. And if you had told me 2 years ago that I would one day stand up in front of a table full of my husband's family, hold a microphone to my lips, and quietly destroy the woman who had made my life a living hell, I would have laughed. Because back then, I wasn't the kind of woman who stood up. I was the kind of woman who sat down, smiled, and pretended not to hear the whispers. But that Christmas? That was the last time I ever pretended. Let me tell you how I got there. I had just had my daughter, Lily. She was 4 months old, soft and perfect and smelling of milk and everything new. I was exhausted in the way only new mothers understand, the kind of tired that lives in your bones. And instead of rest, instead of support, what I got was a mother-in-law who took my baby's existence and turned it into ammunition. She told people, family, neighbors, her church friends, that Lily wasn't growing properly, that I wasn't feeding her right, that I was struggling. That maybe, just maybe, my husband Daniel should be worried about me. She said these things behind my back, with a smile on her face and a casserole in her hands.
This is the story of how I found out, and what I did about it.
I need you to understand Patricia before you can understand what she did to me. Patricia Calloway is 61 years old. She is the kind of woman who irons her napkins and considers it a personality trait. She wears her hair in a perfect silver bob, always carries breath mints, and greets everyone with a hug that lasts just half a second too long, long enough to make you feel claimed, not welcomed. She raised 2 sons. Daniel, my husband, the eldest, and his younger brother, Marcus, who, in Patricia's world, can do absolutely no wrong. Marcus is 30 years old, unmarried, works at the family hardware store, and spends every Sunday at his mother's house eating her pot roast. He is her person, her favorite. She has never tried to hide it. Daniel knows he is not the favorite. He made peace with it years ago, the way children of unfavorite status learn to make peace, quietly, and at great personal cost. He is gentle. He is patient. He is the kind of man who apologizes for things that aren't his fault because he was raised to smooth things over. Which is exactly what Patricia counted on. When Daniel and I started dating 7 years ago, Patricia welcomed me the way you welcome a house guest who has overstayed their welcome from day one. Perfectly polite. Completely cold. She remembered my coffee order wrong every single time for 7 years. Not because she forgot. Patricia doesn't forget things. Because it was a way of saying, you are not worth remembering. I told myself it was just her personality. I told myself she was like that with everyone. I convinced myself that if I just worked harder, smiled wider, brought better wine to Sunday dinners, she would eventually let me in. She never did. When I got pregnant, she reacted the way I imagine a queen reacts when a commoner accidentally sits on her throne. Pleasant enough on the surface. But underneath? Something shifted. Something tightened. Because a baby meant permanence. A baby meant Daniel was truly, fully mine. And Patricia had never accepted that. The first incident happened when I was 5 months pregnant. We had gone to Sunday dinner, a ritual I endured with the dedication of someone completing a prison sentence with good behavior. Patricia had made lasagna. It smelled wonderful. And as we sat down, she turned to me with that smile and said, Sophia, I read that too much red meat isn't good in the 3rd trimester. I was in my 2nd trimester. And it was lasagna. I laughed it off. Said, oh, I'll keep that in mind. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. But that was how it started. Little comments. Innocent enough on their own. Impossible to call out without sounding paranoid. At my baby shower, which she insisted on throwing, at her house, with her guest list, she announced to the room that she hoped the baby had Daniel's temperament, and then laughed. Everyone laughed. I sat there in my paper crown, holding a gift I hadn't unwrapped yet, and felt the room tilt. Internal thought. What does that mean? What is she saying about my temperament? In front of everyone? But I smiled. I always smiled. When Lily was born, 8 pounds, 4 ounces, lungs like a foghorn, absolutely perfect, Patricia arrived at the hospital before I had even been moved out of the delivery room. She knocked, walked in without waiting, and went straight for Lily. She held her for 45 minutes. When a nurse gently said, "I might want to try nursing," Patricia said, "Oh, she's not sure about breastfeeding. She might do formula." I had never said that. Not once. Not to anyone. Internal thought. Where did that come from? I had said I wanted to try breastfeeding. That was it. I had said I wanted to try. "Patricia," I said carefully, "I am going to breastfeed." She raised her eyebrows. Of course. Whatever you think is best." And she handed Lily back to me with the careful slowness of someone returning a fragile object to a shelf they don't trust. 3 weeks postpartum, I was running on 90-minute sleep cycles and learning the geography of a person so small I was terrified of her. We had a pediatric checkup. Lily was gaining weight beautifully. Her doctor said she was in the 85th percentile, thriving. I was so relieved I cried in the parking lot. That night I texted Patricia with the update because Daniel always encouraged me to include her. She replied, "So glad." She seemed a little thin to me, but "I'm sure you're doing your best." I stared at that text for a full minute. Internal thought. She seemed a little thin to me. 85th percentile. She seemed a little thin. I showed Daniel. He sighed, rubbed his eyes, said, "She doesn't mean it badly, Soph. She just worries." He kissed my forehead and went to make us tea. And I let it go. Again. The fourth incident, the one that cracked something in me, happened at 6 weeks postpartum. Daniel's aunt, Rosemary, called to check in. We weren't close, but I always liked her. She was warm, direct, the kind of woman who calls a spade. She asked how Lily was doing, and then paused. And then, carefully, she said, "Patricia mentioned you've been having some trouble with feeding. That you're worried Lily isn't getting enough." The room went quiet around me. Or maybe it was just the inside of my chest. "I'm sorry," I said. "She mentioned it at church," Rosemary said. "And at Margaret's coffee morning. She said she was concerned. That Daniel was trying to stay positive but that you were really struggling." I sat down on the floor of my kitchen. Lily was asleep in the bouncer, 3 feet away. I looked at my daughter's perfect, full cheeks. I thought of her weight gain chart going up and to the right like a little victory flag. "Rosemary," I said, very quietly, "Lily is thriving. She's in the 85th percentile. I am fine." Silence. "Oh," Rosemary said softly. And then, "Oh, Sophia." That was the moment. That was when I knew. I hung up with Rosemary and sat on that kitchen floor for 20 minutes. I ran it through my head in order. Every comment, every eyebrow raise, every carefully worded text, every smile at the hospital. I thought about how she had announced to the shower guests that she hoped Lily had Daniel's temperament. I thought about how she described me to the nurse. I thought about she seemed a little thin. And then I thought, how many people has she said this to? It wasn't worry. It wasn't an overprotective grandmother's anxiety. It was a campaign. Quiet, deliberate, plausible deniability. She was building a narrative that I was incompetent, that I was struggling, that my daughter was suffering because of me, and she was building it in the places I couldn't see. At church, at coffee mornings, on the phone to family members I barely knew. She was taking the most vulnerable period of my life and using it as a weapon. That night, when Lily was down, I told Daniel everything. He listened. He really listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't immediately defend her, didn't say, "She doesn't mean it that way." He sat across from me and he listened, and when I was done, his face was very still. "She told Rosemary you were struggling," he said. "At church, apparently," I said. "And at Margaret's coffee morning. Who knows where else?" He was quiet for a long time. "I'm going to call her," he said. "I know," I said. "But I need you to hear me first. I need you to understand that calling her isn't going to fix this. Because she will apologize and she will cry and she will say she was just worried and nothing will change. Because it never changes." Daniel looked at his hands. And then he looked at me. And he said, "And this is the part one will remember forever." He said, "Tell me what you need." That was when I shifted. Not from anger, from purpose. Internal thought. I needed her to feel, in front of the people whose opinions mattered to her, exactly what she had done to me in front of the people whose opinions mattered to me. Christmas dinner was 6 weeks away. I started planning. I want to be clear about something. I didn't want revenge in the ugly sense. I didn't want to humiliate her. I didn't want tears and screaming. I wanted the truth, told calmly, in exactly the room where she had been comfortable lying. The first thing I did was make a list. I know that sounds clinical, but hear me out. I needed to know the scope. So I started gently reaching out to Rosemary, who was already sympathetic, to Daniel's cousin Linda, who lived 2 towns over and had always been warmer to me than the rest, to his godmother, Eleanor, who I had met at our wedding and exchanged emails with occasionally. I framed it carefully. I said I was following up because I had heard some things had been said about my ability to care for Lily, and I wanted to make sure there weren't any real concerns I should know about. What came back to me was more than I expected. Rosemary had heard it twice. The church story, and a version at Patricia's book club, where apparently Patricia had told the group that I didn't have much maternal instinct and that she was trying to be supportive without overstepping. Linda had heard that Daniel was worried, but didn't want to say anything to hurt Sophia. Eleanor, gentle, careful Eleanor, who chose every word with precision, told me that Patricia had called her in November, 3 weeks after Lily was born, and said she was frightened for her granddaughter. I wrote all of it down. Dates, sources, exact phrases where I had them. Then I went to Lily's pediatrician. I explained that family members were expressing concern about Lily's development, and I asked if she could write a brief summary of Lily's health and growth for my records. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "Sophia, Lily is one of my healthiest babies." She printed me a summary that afternoon. I also called Rosemary back and asked her something important. "Will you come to Christmas dinner?" She was quiet for a moment. "Patricia's Christmas dinner?" "Yes," I said. "Should I?" she asked. "I think you'll want to be there," I said. And I could really use a friendly face. She came. And then there was the video. 2 weeks before Christmas, Patricia called Daniel, not me, never me directly, to discuss the holiday arrangements. The call happened while Daniel was in the kitchen and I was nursing Lily in the living room, door open. I could hear the conversation clearly. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was just there. Halfway through the call, I heard Patricia say, "I'm just worried that Sophia is still finding it so hard. The baby seems well enough, but you can tell she's overwhelmed." I looked down at Lily. Perfectly healthy.
Perfectly fed.
Looking up at me with those enormous dark eyes. I picked up my phone. And I pressed record. I recorded 40 seconds of audio. Patricia's voice, clear as anything, saying she was worried about me, that Daniel deserves a partner who can manage, that she was trying not to interfere, but it's so hard to watch. I saved it in 3 places. Christmas dinner was in 11 days. I need to tell you about the week before Christmas because that week was its own kind of quiet revolution. I stopped performing. I had spent 3 years doing a very specific performance at Patricia's family events, the cheerful daughter-in-law, the gracious guest, the woman who laughed at jokes she didn't find funny and complimented food she didn't enjoy and asked questions she didn't care about the answers to. I had done it because I thought if I was pleasant enough, she would eventually meet me halfway. I stopped. Not rudely, just honestly. When she called to discuss the menu and asked if I was feeling more like myself, I said, "I've always been myself, Patricia." Silence. Then, "Of course. I just meant the postpartum period is so hard." And I said, "Lily's doing wonderfully. Thank you for asking." And I changed the subject. When she texted a photo of the table settings and added, "Does this look okay to you? I know you have an eye for these things," her version of a compliment, which was also a way of saying you're only good for decorative input, I replied with a simple, "Looks great." 1-word answers. No emotional texture for her to grip onto. Daniel noticed. He didn't say anything, but I saw him watching me with something that looked like quiet relief, like he had been waiting for me to stop apologizing for existing, and was glad it was finally happening. I told Daniel everything I had gathered. The full list. The quotes. The audio. I played him the recording of his mother's voice. He went very still. And then he said something he had never quite been able to say before. "She doesn't get to do this. She doesn't get to do this to you." "No," I agreed. She doesn't. We talked for a long time that night. We agreed that we wouldn't uninvite her from Christmas, wouldn't have a screaming confrontation beforehand. We would go. We would let her believe everything was normal. And then I would say what needed to be said in front of the people she had told her stories to. Not to be cruel, to be true. Christmas dinner was at Patricia's house. 12 people. Patricia, Marcus, Rosemary, Aunt Linda, Eleanor, and her husband, 2 of Patricia's friends from church, Daniel's godfather, and us, Daniel, Lily asleep in a carrier on my chest, and me. The table was beautiful. I will give her that. She set a magnificent table. Crystal glasses, cloth napkins folded into shapes, candles everywhere. She had spent days on it. She greeted us at the door with a smile that was 3 degrees warmer than usual, the smile of someone who believes they are winning. "Sophia," she said, kissing my cheek. "You look wonderful. Getting more sleep?" "I sleep great," I said, smiling back. Lily sleeps through. A flicker of something across her face.
Oh.
"Really? Daniel, you didn't mention." "Didn't I?" Daniel said pleasantly. We sat. Wine was poured. Food was passed. Rosemary sat across from me and caught my eye once, briefly. I gave her a small nod. Dinner passed pleasantly enough. Patricia held court the way she always does, directing conversations, steering compliments back toward herself, watching the room with those careful eyes that never quite stop working. She mentioned Lily twice. Once to coo over her hair. Once to say, "She looks bigger. You must finally be getting enough milk." Said to the table at large, with the brightness of someone offering information, not delivering a jab. 2 of the church friends murmured appreciatively. I picked up my wine glass and put it down. I counted to 5. And then the table began clearing for dessert. Patricia stood, smoothed her dress, and said, as if bestowing an honor, "Let me go get the pudding. Sophia, you stay put. You must be exhausted." I stayed put. And then, when she came back into the room with the pudding dish, I stood up. "Patricia," I said. My voice was calm. It surprised me actually how calm. "Before dessert, would you mind if I said a few words? I have something I'd like to share with everyone." She froze. Just for half a second. Then the smile returned, slightly tighter. "Of course," she said. "What a lovely idea." I looked around the table. Rosemary was very still. Eleanor had put down her fork. Daniel sat with his hands folded, watching me. "I want to start by saying that Lily is 4 months old, and she is perfect," I said. "She is in the 85th percentile for weight. Her pediatrician describes her as one of the healthiest babies in her practice." I paused. "I'm telling you this because I want to correct something. It seems there's been some concern passed around at church, at book club, in phone calls about whether I'm managing, whether I'm feeding Lily properly, whether Daniel is worried." The room had gone quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something real is happening. Patricia's smile didn't move. "Sophia, this really isn't the— I have it in writing," I said, "from Lily's doctor, if anyone would like to see it." I pulled the folded summary from the pocket of my dress and set it on the table. "And I have something else." I picked up my phone. Found the audio file. "I'm going to play something. It's short. About 40 seconds. Sophia." Patricia's voice had gone sharp. "I don't think." Daniel put his hand on the table, flat, and looked at his mother. And said nothing. Just looked.
She stopped.
I pressed play. The recording filled the quiet room. Patricia's voice, unmistakably Patricia's voice, warm and confiding and completely fabricated. "I'm just worried that Sophia is still finding it so hard. The baby seems well enough, but you can tell she's overwhelmed. Daniel deserves a partner who can manage. I'm trying not to interfere, but it's so hard to watch." I put the phone down. Eleanor was looking at her plate. One of the church friends had her hand over her mouth. Rosemary looked directly at Patricia with an expression of absolute clarity. Patricia said, That's out of context. You don't understand." I was expressing concern. "I do understand," I said gently. "I've understood for a while. You have been telling people that I am struggling, that Lily isn't thriving,
That Daniel is worried about me."
None of it is true." All of it has been said, repeatedly, to people in this room. I was worried. You were performing worry, I said. There's a difference. I looked at her directly. I made myself stay soft, not hard. Because I wasn't there to punish her. I was there to be witnessed. I have never been unkind to you. I have never excluded you from Lily's life. I have texted you her checkup results and invited you to her firsts and treated you with more patience than I had. And you took those things and used them against me. I paused. I need you to know that I know. And I need the people in this room to know too, because they deserve to have the accurate version. The silence that followed was the longest I have ever sat inside. Then Patricia sat down, and something on her face, the performance of it, the careful architecture of it, simply fell. She said, very quietly, I just didn't want to be replaced. The room exhaled. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about saying something generous, something forgiving. Instead I said, a baby isn't a replacement. She's an addition. But you would have had to make room. And then I sat down, picked up my fork, and said to the table at large, is it a chocolate pudding? It smells incredible. Rosemary laughed first. Then Eleanor. Then, slowly, tentatively, the table came back to life. Patricia did not speak again for the rest of the meal. We drove home that night in a kind of tender silence. Lily slept in her car seat, making those small sighing sounds she makes when she's deep under. Daniel drove. After a few minutes, he reached over and put his hand on mine. You are extraordinary, he said. I was terrified, I said. You were both, he said. Extraordinarily terrified. I laughed. It felt like releasing something I had been holding for months. In the weeks that followed, the landscape shifted. Rosemary called me on New Year's Day. Said she owed me an apology, not for anything wrong she'd done, but for how long she'd heard Patricia's version without questioning it. She asked if she could take me for lunch. We went. We've been friends ever since, the kind of friends I should have had access to years ago. Eleanor sent me a card. Handwritten, careful as Eleanor always is. It said, for what it's worth, I always liked you. I should have said so sooner. Patricia did not call me. She called Daniel twice. The first time she cried and said she couldn't believe I had humiliated her. Daniel listened to all of it and then said very quietly, Mom, what you did to Sophia was not small. I need you to sit with that. He hung up. The second call, 2 weeks later, she apologized. It was the kind of apology that still contained a certain amount of self-defense, the kind where I'm sorry gets tangled up with, but I was coming from a place of love. Daniel accepted it on behalf of himself. He told her that rebuilding with me would take time and that it was fully up to me and that he was not going to manage the process for her. She has been quieter since. The stories have stopped, at least no new ones have reached me. She visits, occasionally, and holds Lily with a care that has a different quality now. Less ownership, more gratitude. She and I are not close. We probably won't be. There is a particular kind of damage that leaves a particular kind of scar, and I have stopped pretending otherwise. But we are honest with each other now, in the small, surface-level way that is the most we can manage. And that, it turns out, is enough. Lily is almost 2 now. She has Daniel's laugh, this enormous, belly-deep laugh that takes over her whole body, and my stubbornness, which I have decided to call determination. She says mama and dada and no with equal confidence, and she does not know that her first year was shadowed by all of this. She doesn't need to know. She gets to just be 2. I think about that Christmas dinner sometimes. I think about the person I was 3 years ago, the one who brought better wine, who smiled wider, who kept trying to earn something that was never going to be offered. I don't miss her, that version of me. But I understand her. She was doing what she had been taught, that keeping the peace was the same thing as having peace. They're not the same thing. Keeping the peace is labor. Having peace is rest. I know the difference now. I don't have a tidy lesson to offer. I'm not standing here telling you to record your mother-in-law or make a speech at Christmas dinner. That was my path, and it was specific to my situation, and it took 6 weeks of careful thought. What I am telling you is this. When someone constructs a false version of you and distributes it to the people around you, you are allowed to correct it. You are allowed to say, "That is not who I am." You are allowed to be witnessed. You do not have to keep the peace at the cost of your own truth. If you are sitting where I was sitting, feeding a perfect, healthy baby at 2 in the morning, wondering if everyone thinks you're failing, hear me say this. You are not failing. And you are not alone. And someday, maybe, you will also find a moment to set the record straight. I hope, when you do, the pudding is chocolate. It really was incredible.